Hello, Herle Burlyites. Top of the podcast to you. I think I've mentioned, about 7 times in the last 9 episodes of the Herle Burly that I'm holed up during this pandemic at my cottage in rural Quebec. I like it here because of 3 things. Moose proximity, high. People proximity, low. Rum and coke proximity, about 2 feet. It's also highly relevant to what I'm going to say next. There are over 7.5 million Canadians living in rural communities, and our presenting sponsor, TELUS, has long been committed to delivering the best quality speed, reliability, and service across all of rural Canada. In fact, OpenSignal, an independent mobile network analytics company, recently found that rural Canadians experience download speeds that are up to 110% faster than users in every G7 country except Japan. And they specifically recognize TELUS as having the fastest network in all of rural Canada. On top of this impressive achievement, TELUS is expanding their rural coverage by building new infrastructure in communities that don't currently have it, and upgrading existing infrastructure in communities that do, to boost signals and increase speed even further. It's particularly critical during this pandemic that Canadians are connected and able to access virtual services like small business connectivity, smart agriculture, and remote and digital healthcare. And TELUS continues to look for opportunities to work with government and rural communities to bring its world-leading networks to more Canadians. Above all, as we navigate our new reality, it's more important than ever to hashtag stay strong, stay connected. Visit TELUS.com/network to learn more. All right, hello, my loyal Herle Burlyites, and welcome to another 2-part pandemic pod. I'm going to let you know a little secret. We had our pre-production meeting yesterday a little early in the morning, and I showed up wearing nothing but my robe and very, very unkempt hair. Basically, I was doing a full-on Jeff Bridges dude from The Big Lebowski, and everybody on the call was very, very worried about the robe, but the robe did not fall open because I am a bathroom robe pro. Anyway, first up on the show today, Andrew MacDougall, former Director of Communications to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Today lives in London, England, is a director at Trafalgar Strategy, and writes about politics and current affairs for Maclean's, the Globe and Mail, CBC News, the Telegraph, and quite regularly on the Twitter machine. We're going to spend a little time talking about the situation in the US with Boris and COVID and Brexit. We're also going to spend a lot of time talking about the past and future of the Conservative Party in Canada. And then we get to our panel, part 2, Jenni, Byrne, and Scott Reid. We're going to pick up the ball on what Andrew and I were talking about. We're going to talk about what we're seeing south of the border, and Andrew and I may touch on that as well. We're going to talk about the politics of why the NHL playoffs are not going to be played in Canada. We're going to talk about why every politician in Canada is getting a free ride right now, and lots of other stories and fun that come along as we go through the show. So stay with us for the next hour and a half, and right now, with us live from London, England, Andrew MacDougall. Andrew, thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, dude, for having me on the podcast. This is truly an honor for me.
Oh, man. I'm sure it is. Yes. So I start every podcast during this pandemic by asking people how they are. So you're in England. You live in a townhouse, an apartment. What?
I live in a 113-year-old pile of late Victorian bricks in a neighborhood called Hither Green, which is in the wild borough of Lewisham. And we're doing just fine. You know, we have my partner and I have a 4.5-year-old and a 10-month-old, and all the challenges of trying to work from home while keeping them somewhat sane and happy. But we're doing just fine compared to a lot of people. We have absolutely nothing to complain about.
So I won't tell your clients, but what impact does having a child have on your productivity when you're around the house, when you're working from home?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. It's not easy, but the great thing is I don't have to waste 45 minutes each way on the trains getting into the office and back. So I gain a bit there. And what I've done, which I love now, is I've scheduled all my conference calls with clients first thing in the morning. So I go out for a nice long walk in the morning, get all that done out in the fresh air, and then buckle down for some work. And it's amazing how much time you waste during a day when you kind of faff about. But being at home, you at least have that discipline of knowing if I don't get this done between nap times and kind of school times, it's not getting done, or I'm going to have to do it at night when all I want to do is put my feet up and watch a bit of TV before I get up and do it all again.
People here seem to be taking up hobbies. Are you baking sourdough bread over there, or got a sourdough starter, or you got a garden going? What?
I wish, but my better half, who is taken to DIY, as we call it here, do-it-yourself renovations. So the office you see behind me, all the paint jobs, all the trim, that's been her. I've been just trying to read books. That's my hobby. I'm trying to read some books.
All right. So let's get to the meat of this matter. You were the Director of Communications to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Now, I know that our friend Scott Reid, I know how he scratched and clawed and begged and groveled to get that job over the course of years. How did you get the job of being Director of Communications to Prime Minister Harper?
Well, I fell into it. I certainly didn't earn it or deserve it in the traditional way. I came to politics very late. The Harper government was elected in 2006. And they basically had nobody to man the posts. And my girlfriend at the time was good family friends with Goldie Hyder, who you know. And during the transition, he said, well, you can write. I'm sure this government's looking for writers. So I started with the research office in 2006, writing. And I quickly came to the attention of Patrick Muttart, who was Harper's deputy chief of staff at the time, and started doing a bit of writing for him. And then at the research office, Corey Tenaik became my boss. And took a shine to me, and I had left then to go to Hill and Knowlton for 6 months during the 2008 election. And just after that election, Corey called and said, hey, do you want to come back and work in the Prime Minister's office doing press? And I said, I've never done press. Is that a problem? And he said, no, you get the politics. I can teach you the press, bit of it. And so I started as Harper's deputy press secretary 10 days before the coalition crisis. So true story, I was in PCO having my human resources meeting about all salary, pay, and benefits in the Prime Minister's office. At the very moment, Stéphane Dion, Jack Layton, and Gilles Duceppe were signing their deal from the devil, receiving furious text messages from Goldie Hyder going, you can still come back. It's only been 10 days, as it all fell apart. And I was literally wondering, like, how long is this job going to last? I finally kind of get your dream job. And ended up being 5 years in the Prime Minister's office and climbing to the top after a pile of bodies had accumulated in front of me. I was the guy that was given the red jersey for Star Trek and told to man a shift and did that for a bit and then took my leave in September 2013. But to answer your question, it was pure luck. I certainly didn't scheme to it. I certainly didn't start as a staffer in an office and kind of work my way up. I just was very fortunate in knowing some people, got placed in a situation, and did the job when I was there.
Interesting. Do you consider yourself to be a conservative activist? Like, are you a member of the party, a working member of the party?
No, I'm not, and haven't been since I moved over here. Obviously, when I was a staffer, yes, I was, but full credit to the people like Jenni and others who actually do the hard work of party mobilization. That was never my background. That was never my interest. I was never part of student politics. Although you cared about the world and liked reading about it, I always thought people that were into that were a bit weird. And how the hell do you know what you want to do in life or what your view on life is when you're young and you haven't kind of lived any bit of life? So I started in politics on the Hill when I was 30, or 31. Yeah, 30, turning 31. So that was quite late compared to others. But no, I'm not a movement conservative. And I think I think that was known, especially when he came into the Prime Minister's office that I worked in. You had guys like Ray Novak, Dimitri Soudas, and Jenni who had been there from literally day one of the party and had done all the hard work of slog, of opposition, coming in at 9% in the polls and working into minority government and then into majority. So it was a completely different experience for me. And did I feel like a bit of an outsider? Maybe, but I was always kind of fully felt part of the team, but you just can't replace that bond between the people that were in there in the trenches from the beginning.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And it's interesting. There often is a little bit of a difference between the so-called professionals who join the government and become part of the government and the people that were there in opposition before the party was was in government. It's interesting cleavage. So the job of Director of Communications to a Prime Minister is 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, extreme pressure. Usually your boss is unhappy with you. And at the end of it, you either are fired or you're sort of disgraced at the end of it, because that's how it ends for almost everybody in that job. So what are the good things about it? What did you derive satisfaction from out of that job?
I think it's the easy ones, David. Like you truly do get to sit around the table when momentous decisions are being made. And certainly in my time in the government, that was during the financial crisis, extraordinary government response to that, the summits around the world, and just kind of witnessing that bit of history. The other super benefit was getting to know your country a lot better than you did before. And how many people can say they've been to all provinces and territories? How many people have been up to the Arctic? How many people have seen the full depth and breadth of their country, small communities in Northern Ontario, the big cities out west, all the communities in places like Toronto. You're blessed to see all of that. And on the election campaign in 2011, we did all the provinces in the first week. Like, how many people get to do that? So that's kind of the great part, to feel that you do get to have those conversations and nudge a little bit of history. And that's not to say I did. My contributions were quite modest on that front. It was really just kind of damage limitation and trying to keep the press out of full-blown insurrection for most of the time, and just trying to keep things smooth enough that we could get a message out when we had to, and try to deal with the bad stuff when it came up. But yeah, as you know, the downside is you kind of get crushed in everything in your life that exists outside of politics. And I grew up in Ottawa. I left Ottawa to go to Toronto, and I came back to Ottawa to work on the Hill, and it was a completely different Ottawa. I saw my friends that I grew up with a handful of times, and I was always that asshole that was on his phone the whole time, scrolling through the kind of BlackBerry trail of doom, because the press obviously functions every day, all day, and there's always stuff that has to happen. And when you get to a certain level, you're the guy that they always call to get a steer, to get direction, and then that puts pressure on everybody in the office, from the issues managers to everyone on down. You have to kind of eat, leave, breathe. You poop this stuff, it comes out everywhere, and it just dominates your life. And so I don't miss that. And I'm never going to go back and do it again, because frankly, I'm too lazy for that. But it was the best experience of my life working wise.
There's a relevancy to that. You'll never feel as relevant again in another job as you felt in that one.
Yeah. And the best advice I got was when I started at the Conservative Research Office. My first boss was a guy named Michael Scrocaro, who was kind of came out of the Ontario Tories. And he just said, you might have an important job, but you're not important. Just never forget that difference. He said, when I started in politics, I was John Baird's photocopy bitch. And now I have the job I have. But it's yours temporarily, not permanently. You are not the job. The job is not you. As long as you keep that straight, you won't miss it when you go, the way some people do. And you won't confuse yourself as having an influence or being the kind of prime architect. The elected officials are the ones that make the calls and get the glory. You're just there to try to make things work a bit better.
Right. You were there for the 2006 election, and then you were there from 2008 to 2015. Is that right?
So I came in March 2006. So the election had happened.
Right.
I went to Ottawa. I left in the spring of 2008, came back just after the election in 2008, and then stayed through until September 2013, which was the G20 summit in St. Petersburg. That was my last day on duty. So when Syria was just really melting down and kicking off, and Obama's red lines were being drawn and erased, and David Cameron had just lost the vote in the House of Commons. It was and we were trying to get the Canada-EU trade deal over the line. It was kind of a busy time, and then obviously the whole Nigel Wright stuff had happened all summer long. So it was a grind.
Bob Fife was on the show last week talking about the various prime ministers he's covered, and he said that he did not think that Stephen Harper had left a significant legacy. What's your take on that?
You might not be surprised if I disagree. I think when you look at Stephen Harper's legacy, there's two sides. There's kind of the functioning party side of politics and turning a kind of shattered and splintered movement into a cohesive whole again and getting it fit enough for government. And that's a great service to Canada, to have that kind of conservative opposition, then conservative government come in. So, and that we're seeing ever since he left. There's been a real challenge to keep that movement together, while at the same time pointing it forward in some kind of way that it can grow and recapture power. So I think that credit will always remain with him. In government, you don't always control. We had a minority parliament, 125 seats at the start, which is a very narrow window to do things. And then you had the financial crisis. So when you consider the economic action plan, how well that went and how well Canada rebounded, that's an achievement. If you look at Harper on the trade front, Canada, EU, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, these are things that he really pushed that will ultimately benefit Canada for a long time, hopefully. And then, on the foreign policy front, I remember, leading the movement to kick Putin out of the G8. So these are things, domestically, does he have a brand new shiny social policy program under his name? Well, he changed the childcare debate and turn that into payments to parents, which Trudeau has now augmented. So you can look at that. It's saying he won the argument and Trudeau's just added to it. So that conversation changed because of it. And more importantly, if you look at the kind of overall harmony and peace in the Federation during Harper's time, sure, the premiers bitched all the time, but there was a separatist government in Quebec for a while, provincially, and that didn't kick things off. And Harper definitely managed that file. So I think if you look across, and then there's almost 10 years of government. So, those are accomplishments. Are they introducing a GST? Are they balancing the books a la Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien? Maybe not. But I'd love to see Stephen Harper's view on the world right now that we live in and what he'd recommend doing. That's for sure.
He's a lot more transformational guy in his head than he was as a prime minister.
Well, I think everybody before he came in to the prime minister's role had him pegged as this rigid ideologue that would change Canada forever, when he always played
I ran those ads.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much. But yeah, and this is, I think, why the prime minister has the chip on the shoulder that he does with respect to kind of public perception in the media, is that it was hammered into them for years before he ever got the job that he was some fire-breathing dragon that was going to change the country. And look, the country still looks mostly like it did when he left. Immigration levels still kept up the way they did. Canada's economy was still great. The provinces were still, happy. The West didn't kind of dominate politics and separate. All these things that were said about him didn't turn out to be. And that's disappointing to some, encouraging for others. And I think the Conservative Party now is trying to, again, find that balance of how do you smooth all those edges off and present a kind of picture that people find credible that can govern the country.
So, assuming that the fact situation remains the same, Andrew, is there anything about Duffy that could have been done differently to make it less of an issue?
Yeah, obviously, and the thing you learn in issues management and dealing with this is it's the old saying: if you're going to eat a shit sandwich, eat it all in one day. And the problem is that not everybody has
hard as that is to do.
Difficult
as that is to do. Right.
Yeah, the temptation is always to think that if we just see off this little bit, the next bit won't come. And when it's better to say, look, if we just put this all out there, and whether it's Duffy or whether if you look here in the UK with Dominic Cummings and the way that happened with the Prime Minister's advisor here, if he just come out the first day and said, okay, yeah, it's true, I went to Durham, here's the full circumstance, which he did 3 days later anyway. There's always that 3 days later anyway. And so you might as well just put it all out there and plead your case on that basis, saying, agree, disagree, we just didn't think that the Canadian taxpayer should be on the hook for Mike Duffy's inability to kind of file his expenses in a reasonable way. The man tried to skim every buck he could ever find, and better to put that out there and lead the charge to reform the Senate and the system there than to have this kind of endless drip feed. And And I get it. The instinct, the hardest thing to do is just let that go and let it all hang out. But I think history shows that if you let it all hang out, then's when you can start the conversation of how do I move forward.
Were you at all influenced as you thought about that issue and managed it? Were you at all influenced by our experience in the Martin government with sponsorship and Gomery and all that stuff?
Well, I think everybody around the table, and Jenni will weigh in on this too. You're always trying to think of how to do that and what's come before. But every crisis is unique in its own way, as you well know. And I think that you just try to get to this place where we can just say the same thing every day and be boring every day. People will get bored of this and will move on. But the thing is, when you don't control all the moving parts, it's fine if you do that, if you stay still and stay quiet. But the Bob Fifes of this world are going to keep pulling on this string. And especially the other principle, if Mike Duffy's running his mouth, telling everybody what's happened, then that's going to come out. There's only so much you can do to shut everybody else up. Now, if you're the only one that knows, and all it requires is you to keep your mouth shut, then you have a chance. But as long as two people know, and there is a press corps that's fired up and really to go after it on an issue that matters, then they'll go after it. And I certainly was not the shoutiest person around the table in the morning, and there were others that were far more involved, quite rightly as it is, and I was kind of had the marching orders to go out there and try to hold the line. And I think history shows that the number of people who were kind of fully in the loop on that issue, as the RCMP went through in exhaustive detail, was ultimately quite small. Did I probably wish I'd asked more questions and been a bit more, I'm the one that has to go out and toe the line, kind of give it to me straight, or maybe I just didn't want to know. I don't know.
Don't you have to know the truth? Don't you have to know the truth to do your job?
Well, yeah, but you only know what you know.
I mean, right? To be a press secretary, this is interesting. If I could just stop you, this is interesting. Because to be a press secretary, you often don't want to know everything, right? In fact, the spokespeople for presidents and stuff often want a little willful blindness so that they can spin without inside. But if you're the director of communications, you have to know the truth.
Well, I think there's also sometimes where people don't put the full truth out there, just not to put you in that weird position where you don't have to go out there and say something that's not true. And that's not the same as holding something back so somebody goes out and commits the kind of sin of omission. It's just that it is not in our interest to have this widely shared, so we will hold this line. And then if it becomes unholdable, then we'll reorganize and find a different approach. But yeah, when you're the front end of the spear, when you're the director of communications, it's your credibility that's on the line. If I'm told something and then I go out and repeat that faithfully, and it later turns out to be untrue, I'm the one that wears that as much as anyone. And that's not.
But even more to the point,
that's just
even more to the point, how do you advise the government properly on a strategy to mitigate the damage if you don't know the truth of the matter?
Well, yeah, and this is the thing. Ultimately, and again, Jenni was the expert at this. Is you just have to dig to the bottom until you find what it is and know all the facts. And ultimately, yeah, I mean that is on you to do that, and to get those answers. And if I look back, that certainly was my failing. I didn't insist on knowing it, and it's one of those funny things. I remember looking through the RCMP stuff. When it all came out, and I found out that I was looped into an email conversation about 10 exchanges in. Had I scrolled all the way back down to the bottom, I would have found a bit more information than I knew about at the time about the party covering off the payment to Mike Duffy. And that happens in government. When you're in government, you're getting 1,000 emails a day, and you're added into all sorts of email trails. It's just people might not believe that you don't actually read all of them or get to the bottom of all of them. But that was the one moment where I read back and went, oh God, had I kind of tuned in and gone down a bit, I would have seen a bit more of the picture that I ended up finding out in the press. And, you can't get angry about that. That's just the way it is. There's so many different things happening in government. That's the other thing, is that for every issue that seizes the public's attention, there are 50 others that are burbling behind the scenes that have to be managed just the same way. So your bandwidth is always strapped, and you're trying to deal with all that stuff.
One of the things I think I learned watching you guys with Duffy and watching us with sponsorship was that if you're in the midst of some sort of issue like that, and you think that an election will cauterize that and will allow you to go on and talk about other issues because the election will be about economic growth or about economic management or about something or other, you're wrong, because calling the election is just going to pour accelerant on that issue. I actually, to be honest, thought we might have been moving past sponsorship when we called this spring election in 2004. But the second we called the election, that thing was back with a vengeance.
Yeah, and I think it'd be interesting to get Justin Trudeau's thoughts on that with SNC-Lavalin when the election came for him. And that depends on the quality of your opposition and your opponent too, I suppose, how much they can force that agenda. But yeah, I mean, once the press gallery gets a bone in their mouth and starts chewing, and once they feel that there's blood in the water, then it becomes a matter of just getting through it. And I think, the election, that Harper ended up losing on, you obviously had the spectacle of the court proceedings happening at the same time, and they had to take a decision. Do we try to run with that happening in the background? And I think they just weren't able to ever get onto an issue that could distract from that, absent maybe when the day Harper concluded the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That felt like kind of a moment that cut through, that was kind of a very good moment for the campaign. But yeah, channel changing is one of those things that used to work when everything funneled into the media from a certain point and was broadcast through certain select points. Now we're at a point where everything just washes over everybody. And it takes a lot more to make people kind of focus on something. But once they do, there's just an infinite number of pain points that can come in and add their voice to your misery. It's really a challenging environment, which again, all the more reason to kind of get it out and barf it all out at once, so you can kind of let the news cycle move to something else. It is the goal. You just have to, get it all out. That's what I tell every client is just, eat it all at once.
That's if they've even admitted it to themselves. So,
that's the hard part. Yeah, you can only if you can't get it out of them, and you have to be able to pin somebody down and say, you have to tell me where every body is buried, where every bit of badness lies, because it will come out. And to your point, if I don't know about it, I can't help you defend from it. And you get into these situations, you can think about, whether it's John Gomeshi and the work that happened with Navigator. You kind of, you're told a certain thing, you go out and defend and press a hard line, and suddenly it all gets blown up, and then you look like the shithead. And you have to drop the person, because you can't be lied to. No amount of money is worth that, being lied to and then made to look a fool.
For sure. So you heard recently former Prime Minister Harper's explanation for the 2015 defeat. You wrote a column about that videotape. I'm not interested in your critique of Harper's explanation. I'm interested in what you think caused the defeat. What would your explanation be about why the government lost in 2015?
I think in one sense it's very easy. You've been in the job for 9.5, almost 10 years. You have a very strong sense that people wanted change. I think you had an economic situation that was good enough that change didn't feel like a risky thing. And then you had in an opposition somebody who popped down some proposals that were fairly eye-catching, whether that was kind of busting the taboo on deficit spending, legalizing pot, electoral reform. These are all things that were kind of big issues. And the generational change and the kind of excitement that Trudeau was able to whip up, I think in that sense it was quite simple. And once he wrong-footed the NDP and caught Mulcair out trying to be more Tory than the Tories on spending, it just made it a two-horse race. And then that was going to be tough for the Conservatives to kind of claw back in there, even if you ran a perfect campaign. And I don't think anybody involved in the 2015 campaign would pretend it was perfect. It's just hard to do. You run into that question, well, if it was so important, why hadn't you done it in 10 years? And there wasn't just enough kind of new thinking or big thinking. And could there even credibly have been big thinking to get that over the line? And I think people saw that and voted accordingly. I certainly don't think it was the media not covering things. I think also you kind of, and this is the thing with the press, you burn a lot of capital with them, and sometimes you have to do it, and it's the right thing to do, and you have to push back. But they had been so sick and tired of covering the government and its MO and its stinginess with information that anything new probably felt like a good thing for them. And lucky them, they've been served a government that is as centrally controlled, if not more centrally controlled than the one it replaced, the one that is as stingy with information, the one who the access to information system has cratered under even more than it had before. So things haven't improved on all the things they used to complain about with our office. And that's kind of, they're like any little sibling. Once the older brother's kind of broken the parents in, the little brother can kind of come in and do what they want and not get the same stick for it. And that's, I think, part of the thing that drives conservatives nuts now is they see Trudeau being no less complete in his interactions with the media, no more forthcoming with information, and yet he doesn't ever seem to get his balls busted over it. So I think that's where some of the bitterness about the media and conservative circles come from. But hey, man, what does it say? Like, hate the player, don't hate the game, or hate the game, don't hate the player. I can't remember which way around it goes, but it is one of those things that you can't get mad at a snake for hissing. You can't get mad at a dog for barking. You can't get mad at Bob Fife for tearing a chunk out of your ass. It's just the way it is. And complaining about it just is waste of breath.
Did you ever for a second in the run up to 2015 think you could lose an election to Thomas Mulcair?
Well, I mean, I was 2 years gone by then. But if you look at the way he had performed in the House of Commons, and had gotten the NDP kind of aligned to kind of being the responsible adults in the House of Commons. It certainly felt real at the time. And let's not forget, in 2011, Jack Layton in the last week of the campaign had all the momentum. And I remember the last week of that campaign, it was when we finally put kind of gas will go up 10 cents a liter line of attack out in the last 4 or 5 days of the campaign, that things felt like they kind of pushed away. And even then on election night in Calgary, everybody was kind of nervously watching. It wasn't a sure thing. And I think you'd be foolish with that history to write them off, because it's not the same sad sack NDP. Well, now it's back to the same sad sack NDP, which is part of the problem. But Mulcair had seemed to give them that sober head and that prosecutorial kind of focus on Duffy in the House, and seemed like a credible person, angry though he might have been, etc. I think certainly compared to Trudeau pre-election, the Trudeau before he was the leader, nobody in the liberal circles thought he was worth anything. They made him like he was a critic for amateur sport. He wasn't given kind of big responsibility, and sure, he had a bit of stardust when he became leader. And I think that kind of underselling of him served him well in the election. He came out in the campaign and smashed it. He didn't put a foot wrong. And that, campaigns matter is the saying, right? And it's true. Trudeau came out there and didn't put a foot wrong, really. And Mulcair just completely got caught out by the tenor of the times. The dynamism and the energy of Trudeau and the promise to spend just kind of went way left on what Mulcair was probably expecting. And that was the dynamic that made everybody sit up and pay attention. That's what it looked like from here.
Yeah, there was a very, very unique phenomenon around Trudeau when he first came into politics, which is the people were almost protective of him. And they wanted him to have a chance to succeed. They were very, I remember seeing consumer reaction to the conservative negative ads, and people didn't want them to work. They didn't want Trudeau's effort, run to be short-circuited early like that. They wanted to see what he had, because ideally he would be good. That was most people's preference. It's a unique thing for a politician. I've never seen people cheering for somebody before.
Yeah, it's like, it's like punching Bambi, right? You kind of like, it just looks mean. And where people might have thought Stéphane Dion was a bit weird and sounded funny, and Ignatieff was just kind of up his own backside and kind of playing the actor's role of what a parliamentarian should look like, and wasn't like really in it for the right reasons. And then Trudeau comes in, and you have this kind of pedigree and this institutional memory in the country of his father's name and what he meant for Canada. And so, yeah, I think you're right. And the harder the Conservatives punched, I think you're right. More people went, hey, come on, ease up. He's a nice guy. And, they'll have to judge eventually when his time as Prime Minister is done, whether he kind of earned that responsibility and will leave a record kind of that merits that. But that judgment's yet to be taken.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about the Conservative Party just before we move on, because you write occasionally, there's a leadership campaign going on, and you write occasionally giving advice about what they should be saying or talking about and how they should be positioning themselves. And there's two questions I want to ask you about that. One of which is, let me put a proposition to you, that the Progressive Conservative Party was split up, and then the Conservative Party was reassembled out of the pieces of that over time. And as it was reformed, it was by 4 or 5 percentage points a weaker, smaller party than the Progressive Conservative Party had been in terms of its voter support base, which meant that this new party, when it has been well, competently led by Stephen Harper, was competitive to either win minorities or hold the Liberals to minorities, but only win a majority by the barest of margins at 40% in the most in the best possible split circumstance. So do you think that I'm correct about that this is a party that is structurally too small to regularly challenge to win a majority government?
I think I would share most of that analysis, David. I think the trouble is, so the Conservative base, and the numbers will bear this out, are more solid, number-wise. The floor is sturdier than any other party's floor, but the ceiling's lower than everybody else's ceiling. And the challenge is, yes, as you note, Harper might have not been everybody's cup of tea, but there was enough people out there that looked at the economic circumstance in which he was governing, looked at his credentials as a sober, serious guy who got that kind of stuff and said, look, I can deal with this guy because he's got it. It is, I think, and this is every Canadian party's challenge. The Liberal vote is traditionally, the accessible vote is higher. But it's not like they've ever smashed it to a degree that we're looking at mid-40s, high 40s. When's the last time a Canadian government got that? And this is where the kind of future of the NDP will really concentrate Conservative minds, is that if the NDP is going to wither away and Trudeau's shot their fox and now dominates the entire left, not left of center, but left, all the way out to the far left, what conversations does that make the Conservatives have? And I think the problem for the party is since 2017, the conversation has been very inward focused. And whereas Trudeau took the leadership race and made it a thing for everybody, join as a member, you don't have to pay, you can vote, be a part of the conversation. The Conservative Party has just spoken to their very committed base that still donates a lot of money and has narrowcasted to them for a long time now, and has forgotten almost that the rest of the world is watching and passing judgment on that. So all the stuff that excites them might not excite the people they need to reach. And I think it's one of those things that as long as you try to play by the rules that have been established in terms of party likes and dislikes, you've almost hemmed yourself in too far when the time comes to broaden out and have a national conversation. And it's like, if you see in the States, the real battles are to get selected as the candidate in any constituency, because everything's gerrymandered to the point where you have to kind of out crazy the crazies to get the nomination. And then you either coast. And the thing is, here we're having this kind of rabid conversation amongst friends about what excites them the most. And a lot of that in containing Conservatives is the fact that Justin Trudeau sucks. And that gets back to the Bambi point about, okay, we're going to punch Bambi again. Well, that didn't work really the last time. And can we have a different conversation that asks people kind of what they want out of the party and what issues? And this is one of the things where coronavirus, you would think, because it's kind of ripping up the rule book, would give some room to maneuver about the importance of self-reliance, communities, family, faith, all those things. What role will they have in society? Because the government's not going to be able to write a check that's big enough for all of this for eternity. So there should be a real opportunity here. And we'll see if Aaron O'Toole and Peter MacKay and Leslyn Lewis and Derek Sloan can have that conversation. Hopefully they can. Well,
wait a sec. It's really seems to me to be an intractable problem. And, people who blame O'Toole and McKay for these campaigns, as you said, they're playing to the people that are going to elect them. So to a certain extent, that's what they have to do. You got to win the leader. You got to win the leadership before you can win an election.
Yeah.
But how can in the last election campaign there were two issues that Peter MacKay would describe as stinking albatrosses that the party was carrying around on his shoulder. One is not being able to talk about climate change in a way that most Canadians, certainly most urban Canadians outside of the prairie region, find compelling and relevant. Mm-hmm. And the second is not being able to completely shed, or in the case of the last election, even attempt to shed any of the social conservatism, but to have those things in the window. So I ask you, how can the party seriously commit to the fight against climate change as long as it is as electorally dependent upon the prairies as it is? And how can it possibly become more progressive on social issues as long as that social conservative base remains as important to the party's voting attention as it is? I mean, aren't you trapped?
Well, I don't think so. And you only have to look at a place like Britain to see how different a conservative proposition can be, particularly if you start with the social conservative issues. One of the striking things over here is that how it's just not mentioned in politics. And it's David Cameron that legalized gay marriage here. So they've had a different conversation. It's Pride Month now. Every conservative politician is happily putting out from the party to the Prime Minister on down, putting out a message of inclusivity that doesn't seem to bother anybody. And it's just not an issue here. And if you look at the environment, there's another example. Britain's just had its 52nd straight day of coal-free power generation. That there are solutions here that work. And this is, I realize the ship has sailed and a lot of time and money has been spent bashing the carbon tax as the kind of ultimate sin. But this is one where you'd hope that conservatives who believe in a market-based economy for delivering the best and most amount of good to everyone could wrap their arms around this. And I guess to your point about being trapped, I think the party's put so much money into never doing a carbon tax. Even if the big producers out in Alberta would say, fine, give us the carbon tax. Just let us know what it is, and we can work around that. Stop moving the goalposts and saying we're going to do regs, we're going to do this, we're going to do more regs, we're going to do carbon, we're not going to do it, we're going to move. Just give us a road to drive down. We'll happily drive down it. I think people are ready for a mature conversation about that. And there just is no magic bullet. You're not going to carbon capture your way out of it. You're not going to magic up a solution. And this is where the market should be made to do the work that it can, particularly now when prices are on the floor. Now is the time to truly kind of put those price signals in there. And I'm on the record.
This is not the conservative position on the climate change is not an ideological decision. There's lots of room in conservatism for people to care about the environment and climate change, right? Well, it's not an ideological issue. It's a regional sectoral issue, right? It's because the party is the defender of Alberta and Saskatchewan's economic interests that it can't take on climate change. Isn't that right?
Well, I don't know about that. I don't think it's that black and white. I don't think it's that dire. Alberta elected an NDP government. It's not that differing points of view can't be had or solutions can't be had. And this is, again, where you have to reach for these moments like now. Like Alberta could not be being hit worse than it is now. And you can make an argument against the current government's lack of interest in the sector as being enough of an attack on them to push them back and offer up something new. And it is now that, and Jason Kenney's smart enough to get that. And it'd be interesting to see if this forces kind of that fundamental rethink of what is the global need going to be for energy. What's that mix going to be, and how can we get in on that? Because anybody that's telling you Canada is going to tick along just fine without getting that resource out of the ground is dreaming. We still need the money. We still need the taxes it raises. And somebody has to come up with an answer. And Justin Trudeau has not done that. He promised everything to everyone, whether you're a green, diehard environmentalist, or a pro-oil, pro-markets person. He said, you can have your cake and eat it too. We can do it all. And he's done basically none of it. And I don't know if you can ride on both sides or stand in the middle of the road looking kind of both ways or not. But he's proven that you can't do it either. So what's the answer? Hopefully it wouldn't be such an ideological issue, and we could realize that while the long-term trend might be away from oil and gas, the short to medium term is still very much in that. And you can either have our oil or the shitbirds that live in Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and other odious places. You can have their oil. And if you'd rather have Nicolas Maduro selling you your stuff instead of the fine people of Alberta, and I get that Ezra Levant tried to have that argument about ethical oil, and we've been down that road, but it doesn't change the fact that it's true, is that you will not
turns out the marketplace doesn't care.
Well, and this is, maybe that's the failure of telling that story, because the Canadian oil and gas sector has a tremendous story to tell about improving its emissions outputs, whether that's intensity, and everybody laughs at intensity targets, but they have cleaned up their act. And they get more than anybody that this is the future, and then they cannot just go out doing business the way they do it. So they want to be a part of the solution as well. And they're just, they're a political football now that's getting caught up. And the people who lose are the hundreds of thousands of people that are getting binned out of the industry now because the price of the commodity is through the floor. And that's not something Canada can laugh at. That's not something that kind of froofy talk about green technology is going to fix. Yeah, ultimately it will be the answer, as should large-scale nuclear power plant building be part of the answer. But let's have that conversation. Why don't Conservatives have that conversation a bit more? There are other things to talk about in the environment. And I think what Andrew Scheer got into is like, I'll have a plan, I'll have a plan, I'll have a plan, I'll have a plan. And then when he put out his plan, it looked like any plan that could have been written by any Conservative government for the last 10 years, with a combination of mix of regulations and blah-de-blah and investments in technology, just with nothing new there to grab onto. So they have to find something new. And
what do you think Trudeau's soft underbelly is? Where would you go at Trudeau?
He just doesn't get shit done, does he? I think attacking him on his kind of character flaws, even as the last election, when you go through an election and you have blackface kind of blow up in the middle of a campaign, you get past that. I think it's because he's done a great job of selling his brand as being beyond that now. And had it been more recent, it would have been a different thing. But I think for Trudeau, you got to get him on competence. He promised to spend a little bit and get things back in order. That's now out the window. He promised, whether it's electoral reform, the list goes on. He just does not get stuff done. And ultimately, if you're in government, you should be there to do things and get outcomes. And I know they can point to the child benefit and the way they've changed that around and pulling kids out of poverty. That was their line in the last election. And fair enough, that's their line. But usually when Justin Trudeau puts his shoulder to the wheel, he doesn't get it done. Just ask Jody Wilson-Raybould, how that goes. So there's, I think they just have to, present something that's more attractive, less focus on Trudeau the man, more on what he's not doing and what should be done differently. And until they have that what should be done differently, attacking him won't matter as much, or won't have the impact they think it will, even if the Conservative base cannot stand.
So that's the key. Yeah, so that's the key point, that what you're saying is attack him on substance and governance, not on his personality, despite the fact that as Conservatives, you hate his personality and you want to attack it. That's not really where the votes are. And I lapse into that sometimes as well, because I just can't, he came out, was it yesterday, the day before, going like, this racism that's happening in the States has to teach us all a lesson. Like, come on, man. Like, not everything's a teachable moment for us because either you screwed up or the world's going sideways. Like, Canadians are on the, there's a reason everybody wants to come to Canada. It's because it's heaven on earth. And that doesn't mean it's perfect, but it means we're well along the way of perfecting it. And everybody is in politics to do that, to make the place a little bit better than when they turned up to take control of it. And the Conservatives have to amp down that anger at him, the man, and just make it about what has he done. And if you look at British politics and the change we've just had with the opposition leader here, Keir Starmer, who's come in and he's had every opportunity to kind of kick the government when it's down. And he's being very constructive, very measured, and very focused on the issue. How many people are you testing? Why isn't the system up? When can we expect to have this? When can we expect to have that? Just keep the pressure on them to deliver. And if you look back to Canada, where the Conservatives had success, it's been holding Trudeau to account on failed programs that haven't quite turned out.
well, you said you had a support program. It's not doing the job you said it was. We're going to have to fix this legislation so that it hits the right target. Lo and behold, they fix it and things are getting better. Just keep it focused on what he ought to be doing and is failing to do, whether that's track and trace, testing, getting the provinces in line, securing the borders. Just keep it about that and less about the kind of parts of his personality that drive you nuts.
Okay. This has been so interesting, and we're almost out of time, which I apologize for because I had a fantastic time doing this. But I do want to get a little bit, hopefully, of reassurance from you about the country you're living in right now. So for the past few years, England has kind of been portrayed as your crazy uncle's disturbed friend. So the States elects Trump and has all this bullshit going on, and the UK does Brexit. And then they elect Boris Johnson. So what can you tell us quickly about Boris Johnson, about post-Brexit England? Is it a mini version of the chaos and dismantling of institutions, etc., that we see in the States? Or should we be reassured that England is still a pretty stable, sane place?
Yeah, they're definitely, David, not the same person. Boris Johnson and Donald Trump are nowhere near the same person. So I wouldn't worry about the kind of scenes you're seeing in the States. I think the trouble with Boris Johnson is that he's wanted one thing his whole life, and that's to be the Prime Minister. And it's that classic tale of what do you do when you finally grab onto the thing that you've always wanted. And I think he wanted to be the Prime Minister that delivered Brexit. And then got past it and then went on to do other things. And now this whole coronavirus thing has knocked all of that off his plate. And I think the thing I'm seeing is that he's struggling to get engaged and on top of and interested in leading the government's response to this. And the classic knock against him is that he's never been a details guy. He's the kind of guy that sets the direction of travel, has strong deputies, etc. But what we now see is that he's basically got one deputy. He's an unelected staffer who he's just had to go through heaven and hell to protect in the media because he doesn't seem to trust his cabinet to do the job. And responding to this crisis is not enough. One man is not enough horsepower to kind of fix this. And I think the difference, as disinterested as Trump is in his job, I think Boris is at least sensitive to the criticism about him that if he doesn't do this job, his name will be mud in the history books. And I think that's the one thing that would argue for him kind of pressing on and trying to get to grips of it. But even the simple conversations of should we extend the transition period for Brexit because of coronavirus, that should be a very simple conversation in my mind. Brexit's already happened. The vote happened. The UK is out as of January 31st of this year. It's not going back in. Now we have until the end of the calendar year to negotiate a new trade arrangement with the EU where 45% of British trade goes. And we can extend that by up to 2 years. But people here are saying, no, we're not going to do that because that would be a betrayal of the vote. In what universe does, by the way, that's a decision. If you exit the EU and trade with them on WTO terms, that's a 15% hit to GDP over time. And that's just not, 5% hit to GDP over 15 years. So to add that on top of the coronavirus misery now, the Brexiteers go, well, nobody will notice if we tuck in a little more economic damage. And the same people are kind of going, well, can we just sort one out before we get to the other? And it's presented as this kind of betrayal. So if there's a similarity, it's the polarization about this idea of the elites trying to frustrate something that's happening. And I share that frustration, but it's happened now. We should be able to deal with the issues separately so we don't damage the country any more than we have to. And I don't think Boris thinks that he can get away with that. I don't think he thinks he can get away with taking his foot off the gas, lest he be accused of betraying the cause that he decided very late in the game to join. Very famously, he had written 2 opinion pieces for the Telegraph, arguing one for Remain and one to leave, and decided kind of at the last moment which one he was going to submit to the paper. Like, that's the kind of depth of thinking we have here. And it was just, which side's going to win? Let me get in front of that parade. And now right. I think he's going to have to find that he has to lead. And that's a very different proposition than being celebrated for your achievements.
But he is a smart guy, right? I heard that. I heard he's quite an intelligent guy.
Well, he's very literate in terms of, you listen to him, he chucks off kind of chapter and verse, but the accusation against him, principally by people on the left, is that he's a charlatan. He's the kind of guy that can bluff his way in the classic British tradition of the kind of, son of the manor, well-born, who can kind of bluff his way through life and get away with things that you and I could never get away with. Like, he won't even tell the British public how many children he has and by how many women. Like, that's apparently a state secret. The whole state of everything with him personally is that everybody knows he's a bit of a BSer. I mean, he got fired from his first job in journalism for making stuff up, for attributing a quote to a member of his family that they didn't make. And then he went to Brussels and started kind of firing all these crazy stories about bendy bananas and all the stuff that kind of EU were going to do to thwart, Britannia. And everybody knows that it's all been an act the whole way along, but it never seems to slow down the act. And that's his particular genius. He's got this personality that people just seem to want to like. And now he's being tested in a way that he's never had to deliver. When you're the mayor of London, you basically control very few things, the transport and the police service. That's it. You're not asked to do a whole lot more, as Sadiq Khan's kind of proving every day. You can just kind of go out there and talk about your values and how London's a great city, but you don't have to deliver much. And Johnson now has to deliver the hardest time to be in government in memory, and he's got to be the one leading the charge. And I think he's finding that very hard. And let's not forget, he's been crippled by this disease. He went into the hospital. He had his kind of own brush with it. And I think it's still slowing him down more than he would care to admit. He kind of gets seen once a week. He showed up at Prime Minister's questions and been pasted by Keir Starmer 3 times in a row now, and forced into U-turns on a couple of issues. So I think he's finding it very hard to not have Jeremy Corbyn, the kind of uber idiot, sitting on the other side of the bench.
Somebody who can be so easily dismissed. Point. Yeah.
Britain's curse for the last 3 or 4 years has been, yes, the kind of shambolic Brexit process, but it has not had a leader of the opposition worthy of the name that could oppose, contest, challenge. And the listeners of this podcast will know how foundational that role is in a democracy, in a parliamentary system of responsible government. You need somebody there calling bullshit on the government. And that's why the decision in Canada for to kind of pack up Parliament in the middle of this is such a shame. Like, the government, A, isn't nailing it. B, needs to be held to account. And now we've thrown away the mechanism to do that. And I think, I hate being the guy that goes, if Stephen Harper did that, people would fucking lose their minds. But they would have lost their minds. And yet... Well,
he did, and they did.
Pardon me?
He did, and they did.
Fair enough.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for taking the time out of your day. And look forward to reading your continuing commentary. It's very, very thoughtful in Canadian politics, and it's been great getting to know you. Thanks for the time with our listeners. And everybody, stay tuned for the panel with Jenni and Scott. If we've learned anything over the past few weeks, it's that in times of crisis, governments matter. So if you've never heard of Queen's Park Today, it's one of Ontario's most trusted news sources for political insiders and for people who actually need to know what's happening at the legislature every day. Whether it affects your business, your stakeholders, or the health and safety of your family, Queen's Park Today is tracking the ongoing developments in Ontario. The newsletter lands in your inbox first thing every morning, so you can start your day off already ahead of the game. The only way to really get the detailed boots-on-the-ground coverage you need is by subscribing to Queen's Park Today, but there's also BC Today and Alberta Today, which are great for people who want to know what's going on out west but don't have the time to follow it closely. To get a free 2-week trial of Queen's Park Today, BC Today, or Alberta Today, go to politicstoday.news and hit the free trial button. That's politicstoday.news/free trial. Tell them that the Herle Burly sent you, and they'll give you a 10% discount. All right, Jenni and Scott.
Hey.
How are you?
Howdy.
Hey.
Well, I'm actually on day 2 of a juice cleanse, and I'm drinking this juice called Turbo, and it's apple, cucumber, celery, lemon, spinach, kale, and spirulina. And it's as good. It tastes as good as it sounds.
I would rather stick my dick in a mousetrap than do a juice cleanse. No, thank you.
Well, I would have agreed with you, Scott. I would have agreed with you until I heard the ingredients. Now I'd do something worse. Like, that is awful.
It is, and
that sounds disgusting.
It's awful.
What does it do?
Yeah.
Like, what is the like? Do you feel toxins seeping out of you? Do you feel
No.
clarity of mind?
The only thing I feel is hungry.
I don't.
But I've started it. I've only got one more day left after tomorrow or after today.
My day has two kinds, two portions now, right? It's divided by what I drink. So there's coffee, and then I lay down on the floor and I start drinking rum. And, sometimes I'll break that up with a bit of beer in between, just, to kind of be civilized. But that's it. Those are my days. There's no night and day. There's just coffee and liquor.
So how long are you going to be on this diet?
Just till the end of tomorrow. It's only 3 days. So yesterday, today, but yesterday was fruity drinks, and today all 5 of them are like this green color. Anyways.
Yeah.
Oh Christ!
I have enough trouble with my urine as it is. I would never do that.
Well, what kind of trouble are you having with your urine?
Well,
oh my God.
Things keep. You know what? That's a spin-off pod. That's healthy, happy tips with Scott and David. You look like John Lennon today.
I'm wearing my New York City shirt in part because, it always makes me think of John Lennon, obviously. But fuck, I love the United States. It is so crushingly awful to watch this happening down there and to watch them periodically go through these things, because there's certainly a lot about that country that that I love, and New York City is a city I love, so I thought I would pay a little tribute today. You're all Habs.
I got a Habs jersey, Habs hat, Habs underpants, as a matter of fact, Habs boxers.
Is this because you're ready for the playoffs?
That's right, I am. I'm. You know what? I'll take it. I'll fucking take it. I'll take it in empty stadiums. I'll take it. I know that they got a pass getting in if they do get in, if it happened. I'll take it. I'll freak it. And I know that people go, millionaires and billionaires and exceptions. And I'll take it, man. I'll fuck
Same.
it.
I'm just sad it's still like 2 months away.
You don't think it's going to be in Canada? How can it not be in Canada? Where else are they going to have the interest level to fill an arena? Well, they're not filling the arena, obviously, but to get even people interested in the activity.
Oh, I don't. I don't. Well, listen. I think it's going to be a moot point because the federal government has given no indication that they're going to lift the 14-day quarantine or consider the 14-day quarantine when players come and start training camp. So I've heard they have internal polling. Ledger put out a poll earlier today that was I think 49% of Canadians aren't that interested and don't think players should get a special exemption, which is unfortunate. So I think that where they're looking at now is obviously Vegas and Dallas, apparently for the Western Conference. And Vegas would make sense. The Verizon Mobile Arena is attached to the MGM Grand. So all the teams and their entourages can stay in one location and they can just cordon off the entire area. And rumor has it Columbus is the East Coast city Eastern Conference city they're looking at.
So you're excited about it coming back. Scott's excited about it coming back. I imagine lots of people are excited about it coming back. Why isn't it good politics for the federal government to facilitate this? Edmonton wanted it like crazy. Obviously, Toronto did. But Toronto, you could make an argument, is probably too active with COVID. But Edmonton has a nice little nest of hotels in downtown, and the arena could have hosted it. Agreed.
And Jason's been out. Obviously, they've decided that for political reasons they're going to go on the side that Canadians don't support special provisions for professional athletes. I'm not sure I believe that. I think a lot of the polling that you see regarding people's opinion and thoughts and what they're saying publicly about the lockdown and the restrictions is somewhat like the exit polls in the 2016 presidential campaign. Everyone thought Hillary was winning because all the exit polls showed that she was. And I think that it was a lot of people who were afraid to admit to people, even pollsters, that they were voting for Donald Trump because, their cousin had already blocked them on Facebook and they got a rant from their mother-in-law. And so I think a lot of people are saying, I don't think we should do this. I think we should stay, restricted. I think all of this matters, but I actually don't know not one person that has followed every rule to the letter.
Let's go back to hockey though for 1 second, because I'm not sure I agree. And I'll tell you two stories. One, talking with some buddies of mine, and these stories start ramping up. I got some pals here in Toronto and flipping around emails saying, what do you guys think? What do you think about this thing? And there's speculation, could Toronto be a hub city? And I was surprised. These are hardcore hockey fans, hardcore Leaf fans, these guys. So obviously they have a cockeyed view of the world, but still they're hardcore hockey fans. And I was really shocked at their reaction. First, they were just down on the whole idea. They're like, it's all bullshit. Okay. It's all bullshit. It's all about these fucking billionaire owners want to get money, and it's all about money. And just scrap the season. It's ridiculous. It's not going to be real hockey. It's going to be junk. Like, just stop and start over when we can start over properly. So I was taken aback by that. So that was thing number one. Thing number two, the idea of creating exemptions for millionaire athletes to serve the interests of billionaire owners really rankled them. So I hear what you're saying, Jenni, but I don't know that I would be so ballsy about ignoring it if I were the government and permitting.
What's the special treatment?
Waive the 14-day period. So I don't know what's going to happen.
Athletes get special treatment all the time, right? Like, I broke my collarbone in ignominious circumstances, but anyway, I broke my collarbone, and I went through sort of 6 months.
Tell people you were four-wheeling on a dirt road. Now, you four-wheeling on a dirt road is basically just a commitment to be in an accident. It's just really.
Yeah, my brother coaxed me out on the device, knowing that I would hurt myself. It's one of his.
I think that's right. I think Bill was looking for you to go down.
Totally, he knew how that was going to end. Absolutely, so did Terry. Sadly, anyway. But the point is that I went through sort of 6 months of seeing doctors, and is it meeting or is it not meeting, or is it going to heal on its own? Aaron Rodgers broke his collarbone and played 2 weeks later. Went in for surgery. They fixed that bloody thing. They fixed that thing up.
But we're in a pronounced environment, don't you think? Like, that's an accepted reality that people aren't confronted with in a way that angers them all the time. You would be asking people to accept an exceptional treatment for those athletes in an exceptional circumstance where they're being forced to make clear it's in people's face. It's like, it reminds me of the other story, which you and I remember, David, in 2000, when Manly went to cabinet and said, we've got to get a subsidy because of the value of the dollar.
By the way, Jenni,
give a subsidy to NHL.
Manly's our Tory, by the way.
It was so, but the story illustrates, right, that general affection for the NHL and for hockey doesn't necessarily translate into support for special treatment from government. So if government were to give special treatment, in 2000, Manly goes out there and announces, we got to do this. These are the intellectual justifications for this argument. And he got machine gunned. Members of parliament had never seen it. This is before social media, if you can only imagine. People were getting phone calls and walk-ins to their constituent offices. They were getting postcards. People went fucking berserk. You're going to give money to these guys that it's coming out of my pocket? Fuck you. And the hockey bag you wrote in on, and Manly had to grovel to the nearest microphone and withdraw it within, I think, 36 hours. So I would be plenty gun shy if I were.
We're not talking about money, though. We're not talking about giving them money. We're talking about, so all of the players and the teams, they've been limited to 50 people total per team, are all going to be staying at the same facility or same facilities. They're all going to be only with each other. I am assuming the NHL is going to be doing daily or somehow regular COVID testing of all the players. So if we are a country that can't even get our shit together enough to be able to let that happen by mid-August, I am actually afraid of where we're going. So we're talking not about money or millions or billions of dollars. We're talking about a host city, most likely Edmonton, because I agree COVID, I think probably the high level of cases in Toronto will probably make the NHL gun shy. Vancouver hasn't been as bullish on it. But if we can't even do that and somehow find a way that those players and those teams are considered quarantined during their training camp, I just think it's very sad. So it's going to go on without us, and it means a Canadian city won't have, and albeit it would be small, but they will not have the spin-off money from catering, from hotels, from, well, in Edmonton, things are actually open. It's not like here. So I think it's unfortunate that the federal government is playing politics. I
don't think they're playing politics. I think they're looking at it and saying, do we have a uniform policy? To me, the lesson of the Manly story is not so much that it's about money, but it's about unequal treatment. And look, just to be crystal clear, I love the NHL. Obviously, I'm drenched in Hab stuff today. I would like to see this happen, and I would support it. I would be cool with the exception. I would. But I've detected, even in my circle of friends, enough inherent suspicion and cynicism toward it that I think the government is entirely warranted to be wary of a policy that would force them to make an exemption for millionaires to benefit billionaires, and not. It would be irresponsible to not say, how's that going to play? That might play badly.
But okay, so Justin Trudeau breaks the exception he gets special privilege every weekend that he goes to Harrington Lake. He crosses the border when no one else is allowed to go to their cottages. David's at his cottage because he went before the lockdown started. And I'm saying this as I don't begrudge Trudeau going to his cottage. I don't blame him for going. I'm just saying you can't say that we don't want to do this because we don't want to give anyone special, any special privilege when Trudeau does it every weekend.
But you're applying comparative reasoning to an emotional issue. And I'm just saying that the profile of the issue creates a potential to backlash on you as a government that it would be like, come on, like you are obligated to weigh whether or not this would bite you in the ass. And I'd like to see it happen. I'd love for Toronto to be a hub city. I'd love for Edmonton to be a hub city.
Why do we care? Why do we care where it is? It's a TV show anyway. It's not going to bring any economic benefit to the city that hosts it.
It'll bring a bit of it.
It'll bring some.
It will bring a bit of economic development. I think it's actually it's a good thing. It's a morale booster to know that, we've got, 12 teams in Edmonton or somewhere in Canada that are playing. And so what I've also heard is, so if the Eastern Conference will play in the Western Conference, so the Eastern playoffs will be in the West, Western playoffs will be in the East.
Fuck, you're blowing my mind.
Well, because they don't want the NHLPA doesn't want the host city that they feel that it's a disadvantage for the host city because the players there will be able to see their spouses and their families, and all the other teams are going to be sequestered for the month that this is going to be taking place.
Well, right now
nobody wins the Stanley Cup. Nobody wins the Stanley Cup this year anyway, right?
Unless the Habs do, in which case it counts. But
exactly.
No, you're right. It's not going to be real. That's kind of what my buddies were saying, right? They're like, this is bullshit. This isn't real hockey anyway. It's not a real season, all that stuff. I'm kind of like, you know what? Right now I'm reduced to spending my sports wagering budget on, the dog park and which dog finishes going to the bathroom first. So I will gladly applaud the return of hockey. I'll be dying for it by there. And by the way, there is probably a first mover advantage. Like the NHL gets onto screens earlier. The amount of money that will be recruited to the league, the amount of attention that will be recruited to the league, the amount of eyeballs to the league probably benefits the league.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's all like, and I miss sports. Like I'm to the point I'd even watch soccer at this point.
No.
I'm getting to that. I'm getting that desperate.
I can't get into the culture of the English Premier League. You saw these guys that get up at 8:00 on Saturday morning and go to like designated bars and, and they whenever they all like get hard-ons for all this stuff. I don't know. It's not my scene.
Well, it's obviously an affectation, right? They all affect various English Anglophile activities and habits and clothes and shit. And then they get up super early in the morning and go to a place to watch an inferior sport. So it's obviously they're affecting something. They're affecting something. I mean,
I'll rattle a mailbag.
All right, I alluded to it. I alluded to it off the top, but the U.S. of A. at the moment, reeling from a terrible outcome with COVID, now gets hit with riots and demonstrations and protests across the country as a result of another police killing. I don't know that we can go through this without... I don't raise this because I expect any of the three of us to have any insight into what's happening in the United States or what the true nature of race relations is down there. There's many, many many people that will be interesting on that subject, and we won't be among them. But we should have some opinions about how the political leadership of the United States is handling this. And by political leadership, I mean everything from the president, obviously, but to other congressional leaders and mayors and governors. It's all a pretty disturbing show. Jenni, do you have any sort of initial thoughts on?
Well, I think what happened to George Floyd was terrible. It was such a disturbing video and story when it came out, and it obviously that the cop that murdered him apparently had 18 other complaints against him over the course of his career. It's almost like he actually acted like a sadist, and I think that the other 3 cops that stood around and watch him sit on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes should be charged with murder as well. I think the protests are completely justified. I don't think the looting and the vandalism and the burning of buildings is, but I think peaceful protests are definitely justified. In terms of political leadership, Trump has definitely not risen to this to the occasion, to what the tone. He's come across as completely out of touch and tone deaf when it comes to this, and has for the last week. I would argue the last week of his presidency has probably been the worst week on a lot of levels in terms of his presidency, and I think it's really going to have lasting damage to him.
Scott?
Well, I'll be. I won't do much other than just with respect to George Floyd. I'll just echo the comments that Jenni said, because I find this conversation difficult to engage in because.
Where does a person find the hate, Scott? Where does a person find in themselves the hate to have your knee on a guy's neck till he goes unconscious and then minutes go by? I mean, it's unbelievable. I don't know how it's manslaughter. It's a premeditated murder as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, me too. And I don't think that's a marginal opinion. I think that most people think that it's murder, and I think that lots of legal analysts think it's murder. I don't know. I don't know the answer to your question. I mean, I think there is a broader context, which is awkward for me as a guy who's whiter than a bathroom sink to really speak to. I'm not an American. I am a Canadian middle-aged white guy. So, where's the hate come from? I don't know. From a whole plot, I think there's a bunch of rivers that are flowing into that bay. I think there's history. I think there's policing. I think there's local issues. I think there's an underclass of Blacks and Hispanics in the United States and how they're viewed and how they're treated. And it just all gets together in one very, very toxic soup, which is why this issue never goes away in the United States, and why sometimes it flares up in a really horrifying fashion, and it requires leaders who will de-escalate it and disarm it and call for calm and address it with intelligence and empathy. And Trump has none of that. And to me, the most striking thing about his response is, and I'll move to the politics quickly because who cares what we all think about it, in the sense that everyone's opinion is worth the same on this stuff. But to me, it's we know that Donald Trump, he often is tagged as a narcissist. And I really do think, without trying to pretend to play junior psychologist, I do think it applies. And I think the fundamental aspect of that is that he has no empathy, he has no capacity to imagine someone else's interest. And so even as you go through this, all you hear from the White House is what it means to Trump. His tweets are about, I want to thank the Secret Service for protecting me, as the gates are pushed down, as the cities are in flames. He doesn't give a flying fuck about anyone else. He's not concerned about the Floyd family. He's not concerned about what's happening in the streets. He's only concerned, and his only lens through which he can view this stuff is himself. And their political calculation is laid bare. They talk openly about it. They don't even have the veneer, the pretense of, oh, well, this is what public interest guides the president's thinking, and our political interest is affected in this way. They just brazenly are like, this is what our political interest is. So I thought what we saw as a response yesterday with his speech and then that photo op with the Bible, that was pornography. Like, that was absolutely fucking profane. And if I was a Christian, and I'm not, I'm an atheist to be blunt, but if I was a Christian, I'd be ragingly offended at him using my book of faith as a prop. So there's all that. What do I think about it politically? I think this is super damaging. And I have such a bias, as we joke about it all the time here, but I am a hater. I am a flat out hater of Trump. So I worry that I'll be unobjective about it, and that there'll be a confirmation bias in what I see. But I genuinely think that if this much instability and chaos occurs under you, that you can't be the remedy to it. That other than a small portion of people that are going to applaud you under any circumstances, a lot of people say, I just want this to stop. Okay. It's ultimately whoever I think started it, whatever I think happened. I look to government and the highest levels of government to make it stop. And he doesn't make it stop. He makes it continue. He elevates and escalates it. And I think that will harm him, because I think people will say, I will take an inadequate democratic response over continued escalation and inciting behavior. I just don't want instability. And I think that they are trying to play this to their advantage, and I don't think it works to their advantage. I think Nixon won in 1968 because he said he would make the mess stop. And Trump is trying to get reelected on the promise that he will make it continue.
Well, and it's not
Scott, wait, unless you take the view that Nixon didn't win because he said he'd make it stop. Nixon won because all of the white voters understood what he meant by that.
Oh, maybe.
In which case Trump can still get that. In which case Trump can still get that. Can still get that vote.
He'll get that 37% of the vote. I guess to me, the everything I've ever seen in politics tells me that whether it's something as overt and violent as this, or whether it's just a scandal or a mess, if it occurs under your watch, at some point people say, I don't know who to blame or who started what, but I am blaming you for not fixing it. So fucking fix it, because that's your job. And he's not fixing it. He's exacerbating it.
Well, and I think part of the problem is you've got the protests regarding George Floyd, and you've got and then you have other protests that have turned violent, which I don't think actually have anything to do with George Floyd. I think people are completely on edge. This was a catalyst for certain people. You've got a country, and this is where Trump's ultimate problem, other than what we're already talking about, the tone deaf nature and the shit show that has been the last week. But you have a country that is sitting at 23.1% unemployment. There are 40 million Americans out of work right now. And to put that into context, in January and February with the job numbers, it was at a 3.5% unemployment rate, the lowest in 50 years. So he has serious problems of so many people being out of work, and so many people being seemingly desperate as well that he has to deal with.
You know, the real comparator.
No, I don't know, Scott. If I could just say, I'm just going to say, if I don't know that any of us can apply a political analysis to what will work for Trump or not, because I don't think we get it. Like Scott, I just say the other day, last week, Washington Post came out with a poll, Jenni, yesterday, that was done last week. Right. So last week, 46% of Americans had a favorable opinion of Donald Trump. Right. And I just don't, other than when I talk to you on this podcast, I just don't run into people that have a favorable view of Donald Trump. I don't know how anybody can have a favorable view of Donald Trump. So if after all this time, if after his whole life, then the 2016 election, then his 3 years in government, 4 years in government, Scott, if you still have a favorable opinion of him, is this going to piss you off?
Well, that's what gives me hesitation.
Or is this exactly what you signed up for?
Well, that's what gives me hesitation. I say off the top, quite sincerely, that I worry that my bias obscures me from being able to bring a cogent analysis to it. That I have to doubt my own instincts. That's fundamentally where I'm at. I wonder when it comes to Trump that I doubt my own instincts, not because I think he defies the laws of political gravity, but because I find it so inconceivable that anybody would find any aspect of the guy admirable. But I think the historical comparator might be Johnson in 1968, which is that when he was confronted with this mess, a mess of the kind that Jenni just described, and perhaps not as bad as it. He said, I got to cash in. Like, I'm out. I can't actually win re-election, and I don't want to win re-election and in the middle of this and defend this. And so I understand he's got a 46% approval rating. I think it will dip now, but I think ultimately the underlying drivers of this thing mean that he could. I hope, obviously, but I think I think that he's headed for historic defeat.
Listen, I think his numbers will take a hit, but I think that, let's not forget 66 million Americans voted for him. So there are people that support him. So it's to say that you don't know anyone that supports him. Well, our circles are all Canadian. He doesn't give a fuck what we think because we're not voting for him. I think the reason that he had the approval ratings that he has is for the reasons I stated before, that the States had a 3.5% unemployment rate. Life was getting better for people pre-COVID, and then COVID hit. And the plus side, the pluses of Donald Trump being president that focused on the economy, and I've said it before, his Twitter persona is different than his other persona. That's what people like. This is showing them a different side. As I said, he's been very tone deaf. He has made very wrong decisions over the last week. So we'll see how much it affects. We'll see if he will be able to get his sea legs back, so to speak.
Can I throw one other thing in, Dave? I don't know if you guys saw this report, but I thought there was something that chilled me to the bone as someone who wants to see the guy defeated and pasted and humiliated at the ballot box. It was a report about Democratic strategists presenting to powers that be with the election campaign team and pointing out that Trump, by the time we get to November, there's a very real possibility that Trump could be campaigning with the most glowing economic stats in American history. That if you do see the reopening, and if it's not halted or corrupted by a resurgence in COVID, that just the natural momentum of the reopening of the economy will show relative numbers to show this gigantic leap in jobs and rehires. It will show this gigantic leap in GDP, and it might create a swell of economic optimism as the opening occurs, and you're a month and a half, 2 months into the opening. That creates an environment on election day that's far different and dramatically different than the one that we think about. And I hadn't thought about that. I guess I'm stupid. But if that comes to pass, as you say, Jenni, I mean, that's his rock bed beyond his base, right? Is the economic narrative. And that sounds plausible to me that could occur. And if that does occur, how much of a lift does it get him? Does it get him up to 46 and then spring him into 51? And if Biden makes a mistake, which he's thoroughly capable of, and in fact, almost certainly will do. So who knows?
We'll see. We'll see. I don't, and I'm probably tainted from like Canada, but I'm not sure the economy will make a rebound by this fall. Even as people reopen, restaurants are half full, stores have it's not a pleasant experience. Anyone that I've talked to that has gone shopping has had the same experience as what I did 2 weekends ago. It's just not a fun experience. Like, I'm not going to go and line up for an hour outside the Canadian Tire to buy cleaning supplies. I'm just going to pay double for them at Rexall across the street where there's no lineup. It's that kind of thing. So I would listen. Who knows? And like, everything can change. Like in 3 months, I just don't see the economy making that big of a rebound there or here, which is unfortunate for us because we need them. We need a strong American economy to trickle up to us.
I think, Scott, I really worry that I think that we are enjoying this period of time right now where it's all about Trump and the media are on him, and he's continually under pressure every day for government administrative factors. I'm not sure how much we're going to enjoy the campaign. In addition to the economic considerations that the two of you have been talking about, I still think that he has set up a couple of positions. America first, America against the world, screw the Chinese, screw the World Health Organization, screw the United Nations, all that stuff, that issue, and this law and order question, which, he's trying to turn this into a law and order matter, which in the United States is a very loaded concept that has a lot of racial connotations to it. And those two issues have historically been very, very potent issues, and being on the wrong side of them has usually signaled defeat. And successful Democrats, for example, have gone to great lengths, like Bill Clinton, to appear to be on the law and order side of the law and order debate.
Fair enough. I just think that you have to put, if you're the Democrats, you have to put all of this stuff together in a box. Say it's a box of awful, it's a box of chaos, and therefore the election is a referendum on Trump. I think as long as it's a referendum on Trump, even in a polarized society, you win narrowly. If Trump permits, if the Democrats permit Trump to reframe it as an election about an issue set, then they're taking a really untenable risk. So whether it's law and order or something else.
Then who do the Democrats pick as a running mate? Because they need someone that is very charismatic, that is very that can take a lead. Because Joe Biden looks like worse and worse every day. Like the interview 2 weeks ago where he said, "I'm going to beat Joe Biden." Like it was almost like he didn't know he was sitting in. I gotta go. My wife needs to use the computer to do a Zoom call. Like I gotta go.
You're right. His hair gets whiter every day. He looks like Imhotep. He looks like he's just been risen from the grave, and he's going to. The bandages are falling off of him as he chases an Egyptologist
and his
around.
skin is translucent. And yeah, no.
So who do the Democrats pick?
I don't know. Maybe you go to somebody like Cory Booker. Maybe you take somebody. Well, I guess he can. He said he's going to pick a woman. So, but you know, I mean, I love Kamala Harris. I just think, you know, I know she doesn't work geographically for them in terms of picking and helping them with the state. And David, you rightly pointed out that in a world where they lost battleground states in the last election, they can't afford to not think about it that way. But when you take a look at
her record as a prosecutor was very controversial in the primary.
And it might be
not at all
balanced.
certain that. Well, maybe. I mean, it depends on how you are trying to play this thing, right? And if you're trying to, Kamala Harris would not be embraced unanimously by the black community as the answer to George Floyd.
No, but to your point on a triangulation thesis, if you want a vice president who is one female, two who can step in and be president if Biden takes a walk off a short pier, and if and someone that insulates you, as you were just articulating, David, on the law and order stuff, and brings ballast to the ticket on that, you know, you can make a compelling argument for her. She doesn't give you a swing state, and yes, it has some internal controversy. I think you've got enough animation among your base as Democrats to vote against Trump that you might be able to afford that luxury.
Jenni, this week the Conservative Party set the dates for their leadership debates.
Yes, very exciting.
I said on Twitter yesterday that no leadership campaign debate has ever mattered in Canadian history. Several people misunderstood what I said and thought I meant that about leaders' debates in the election. Leaders' debates in the election are almost always consequential and almost always make a difference one way or another. But I have personally never seen a leadership debate make a difference. So
not in the race, but as I saw my friend Gary Keller pointed out to you, Stefan, we didn't get the job done. That helped us. That helped us for a few years. But I agree.
Yeah, the clips are. Yeah, Aaron O'Toole's not going to be able to overcome his deficit by have sharp performance in a debate.
No one's. It's not going to make a difference. And this is going to be a weirder time because people aren't going to be able to be there and what have you. So yeah, the French one is on June 17th. The English one's on June 18th. Sitting with pins and needles for it to come.
That may be the outlier then. Here, I agree with your analysis that never one of them has made any real difference in the leadership race, David. But I think that it might be consequential for McKay, and not with Conservative voters, not in terms of the outcome of that contest. But he's had such a shit campaign to date, and he's going to win. And it's like he arrives at this moment winning in spite of his campaign, which is a crummy way to proceed. So at some point, you need to pivot out of that if you're him. You need to pivot to a better place. And the debates could provide, at an elite level, with media, with influencers, with opinion leaders, it could provide him with an opportunity to look clearly better than his alternatives and appear to be competent. And you say, okay, in contrast to his social media campaign, which has been erratic and insane, the candidate himself on display in the first full way we've seen really looks pretty good, looks pretty competent, not inconceivable as a prime minister. And that may be the opportunity for him is to relaunch Peter MacKay after what has been a ghastly motherfucking campaign for him.
But and this is also difference, if we're going to talk about differences between leadership races and election campaigns, is at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether he had a bad social media campaign. It matters who sells the most memberships and who gets those people out to vote. I'm not saying the importance of campaigns for for a general election, but for a leadership race, you've got 100 points per riding. You got 338 ridings. It's how many points those candidates are winning and where they've sold their memberships and how they get their votes out. So I think it's so at the end of the day, it's not going to matter. I think the average member, I think where it's a plus for Peter's campaign is I don't think the average member has paid that much attention. I don't think the average person is on Twitter following like the back and forth. I think that they, for the average member in terms of between Aaron and Peter, Peter's been like a household name for the Conservative Party since the start of the party. He's a former leader of a legacy party. He was a high-profile cabinet minister. So he's got that advantage right off. And if he's sold the membership numbers that I'm hearing he sold and he gets those votes out, I can't see how he doesn't win.
For sure, but so I guess I was saying that's taken for granted, that the debate won't matter to the outcome of the race and he will win. And therefore, he needs to use the debate as an opportunity, knowing that more eyeballs will be on him than ever before, just as an opportunity to present different not to the general population, not to the conservative voters, but rather to that crust of media, observers, opinion leaders who are paying attention and have deemed him to be unworthy because of this campaign, and have them start to turn their opinion around. So that every mention of his name doesn't come with parenthetically, what a clown. The chattering class. I completely get it. I think it should be interesting. I've heard very good things. As I said, I wouldn't know Derek Sloan if he walked in the front door. Leslyn Lewis, I've heard very good things about. Aaron's a very good public speaker, so he's going to perform. He is going to perform well going into the debates as well. That's his forte. He's smart. He's high up on policy, so it'll be somewhat interesting to watch. I will watch it from the confines of where I'm staying in Fenelon Falls.
Scott, I've never wasted more time in my life than I did preparing Paul for those leadership debates in 2003 against Manly and Cops.
Yeah. Because
they were so inconsequential, so dreadfully dull, so, oh my God, and we spent hours and hours and hours.
Well, because you can't afford to take it for granted. You can't assume that just because in the past one of those debates haven't mattered, that this one won't. You can't assume, since you're the overwhelming front runner, that it's inconsequential and then you get tagged badly. But, I will say, David, that prepping for those leadership debates led to one of my favorite all-time moments for us, and that was when we were up in Whitehorse, and after the debate, we went out to that dried up lake and drank a case of beer in the middle of a lake. And Jenni, we're sitting in the middle of this dried up lake in Whitehorse. It's beautiful. The sun is coming down, and then all of a sudden we see this little dot on the horizon. The dot gets bigger, dot gets closer, dot gets bigger, dot gets closer, dot gets bigger, dot gets closer. And it's two gigantic, nasty looking freaking dogs with 100 teeth and all kinds of muscles, and they're steaming toward us. Right? I'm not kidding. Like, they're coming at us, and we're all sitting there, and it's like you can watch your death arriving, right? Because it's a slow motion thing.
I'm surrounded by Scott Reid, Tim Murphy, and Brian Guest. I know that if I don't take these dogs down, we're fucked.
I had just finished peeing because of the way the wind was blowing on Brian Guest, and now these dogs are going to come and end our lives. And these dogs were coming right at us, and there was nowhere to go. We were a half a mile away from getting anywhere.
Do? Throw beer bottles at them?
Well, we did what you would expect of us. Exactly what you expect of us. We stood there in fear and cowardice and remained still. We did nothing. And the dogs, it was literally like a Looney Tunes cartoon. Woo! The dogs just blew right by us. I don't know what they were gutting for. We assumed they were going to eat our entrails, but instead they just ran right past us, kept on going at 110 miles an hour, and we collapsed on the ground in fear and relief. It was so I disagree with you, David. I thought the debates provided us. That was one of my. I love that entire trip. to Whitehorse.
That was going to Whitehorse. That was the best thing about the leadership debates for sure. And that little person that you met in the bar, that was also quite something.
That was a memorable night. That was memorable.
That was a memorable night. The last thing we should talk about, speaking of road runners, people running fast, is we may have our first pretender to be the replacement for Justin Trudeau. This Minister Champagne fellow, when Bob Fife was on the show last week, when we were chatting before the show started, he said, this guy's a mini Chrétien, and he's going to be he's going to really take a run at the leadership. And I think Fife thought that he really had some goods. That's interesting, that somebody be talking about him that way. And then lo and behold, there's a piece about him that pops up in Maclean's magazine that all talks about his ambition to be Prime Minister and how he's glide inexorably along that path. And I thought to myself, it's really interesting. But then I guess we're not halfway through. We're into the second term of the government. Assuming that the Prime Minister only stays 2 terms, although that's not a reasonable assumption as I know. But it's interesting that this fellow has chosen to stick his head up this way and to have his ambition at this point in the government so transparently portrayed.
It's a mistake. It's a flat-out mistake. I don't know how deliberate it is. I don't know how much of it is just, Maclean says they're going to do a profile. Why wouldn't you want a profile on you? And then the leadership discussion gets naturally folded into it.
I know. I can't imagine what leaders must think when, people in their cabinet are trying to take them out and take their job.
I've never heard of such a thing. I just think it is. But I think it's a real mistake for him because
in year 5, it's shocking. In year 5,
it's just I don't. There's
year 7 is a whole different story.
You're failing to mention a piece of this puzzle that I'm puzzled by, David, which is that there is this kind of quiet notion that Trudeau's he's not going to stick around and he's not that interested in the job. All of which I think is complete bullshit. All of which I think is completely a false assumption. Until proven otherwise, I believe that these people want this job for as long as they can have it until they're either killed and put in the graveyard of political entities or that's it, period. They're just killed. That's it. Or until they literally die in office like virtually Mackenzie King. I just don't. So I don't know why, there is no leadership dialogue around Trudeau really right now. I don't know why you would introduce it. I don't think you want to be branded as future leadership potential if you're him. And again, I don't want to ascribe it to him too greatly. My guess is it's an accident, not a design, but I don't think there's any upside in it.
I kind of agree with Scott. I don't see any indication that Trudeau doesn't want to be where he is. And frankly, he's still the Liberal Party's best asset. That was an election that everyone expected at least it to be tighter than what it was or lose. And he was a sitting leader who, despite it coming out during the campaign, had dressed in blackface at least 3 times in his life, still ended up winning a very strong minority government. He was also handed a gift this week by the Liberals. So we're in a universe where this government is spending billions and billions and billions of dollars on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. We're going to have a $1 trillion net debt. And he was able to essentially sell magic beans to Jagmeet Singh.
1 trillion.
Sell magic beans to Jagmeet Singh to become the only government in the world that's not sitting to discuss any of the economic or measures around COVID. So basically, Jagmeet Singh said, I want 10 sick days. And Trudeau's like, yeah, well, nothing to do with me, but I'll bring it up at the tail end of the next call I have with the premiers, and we'll call it a day. So he's been given this gift of having Jagmeet Singh, who basically cut the NDP seats in half, in making deals with the Liberals that leaders like Leighton and Mulcair never would have made. And if you look at any of the latest polling out, 20% of people that voted for the NDP last election are saying that they're going to vote for, they would vote for the Liberals if an election were held today. So I see no reason as to why Justin Trudeau wants to leave. And I don't see why the party would want him to leave either.
What would be better?
Do you think Singh is, wait a second, do you think Singh is at least if you wanted to say this wrong, because I agree with everything you say, Jenni, he's horribly ineffective and largely useless. But is it because he's actually a genuine person or something? Because the reason that Layton and Mulcair wouldn't have done any of the things that Singh is doing is because Layton and Mulcair, despite especially Layton's reputation, were cutthroat, ruthless political operators. And Layton had an electoral objective in mind that had nothing to do with any NDP principles. It had everything to do with achieving electoral influence. This guy doesn't seem interested in electoral success or winning or politics in any traditional way.
Well, then he has no business being the leader of a federal political party. You can't even say it's genuine. What he got out of the Liberals was nothing. It is not federal jurisdiction. And the most Trudeau can do is ask the provinces to do it. And my guess is, considering all the money that's flowing back and forth, the last thing he's going to do is go to the provinces and put too much political capital. So if Jagmeet's this isn't, he's not like running, he didn't run to be like secretary of like his grade 8 class. Like he's the leader of a political party. And if I'm people in his caucus or I'm part of the party, I'm getting really fucking worried, because this guy is actually going to bring it down even further. Like, this is almost destroy the NDP level. And I have to think that people around him or longtime party activists are like shaking their head and saying, what the fuck are we doing?
No kidding. I'd be terrified. I think, by the way, he's taken the wrong lesson from Jack Layton. I think they think that what they're doing is actually aping and modeling Layton, because I think they're saying, well, and when Martin was a minority, the path to victory began with us securing key concessions from a policy perspective from Martin, so that we could demonstrate that we were important and that we got policies that mattered out of the government, and we demonstrated that we had that value. That was part of our value proposition. And from there, then we created a foundation of substance for ourselves that allowed us to propel into success when the moment came. I think that's what they think. And I think that's the model. And they're saying, we're going to do the same. So you see consistently from the NDP over the course of the past 2 weeks, they've been saying, look at all the good that we've achieved. We are the ones that are responsible for this policy and for that policy and for this policy. And I think they think that's the Layton model. I think they're missing the point. The Layton model, first of all, is get really lucky in Quebec in the last 2 weeks of an election campaign. But more importantly, I guess for these purposes, is the point you made, David, right? Which is the only path to victory for the NDP lies through the smoking husk of the Liberal Party, and you cannot do things that help the Liberal Party. And Layton never did anything to help us. He was dedicated to hurting us in ways large and small. And this just helped the Liberal Party. And I don't think that Singh gets that. And because he doesn't get that, I'd be terrified if I was a New Democrat MP, because I'd be like, this guy's got to get out of here.
For the NDP to get centrist votes, they have to convince voters that, center-left votes, they have to convince voters that there's no meaningful difference between the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party. Layton worked at that assiduously, and Singh is doing the opposite. But anyway, we're at the end of our time. Thank you both for being on again this week. Delightful. And thank everybody for listening. I want to thank TELUS, our presenting sponsor. I want to thank the Air Quotes media team and Metal Donkers Good for getting this thing up and on the air, and all of you for listening. And if you liked what you heard, please give us a review or a rating on iTunes or a shout out on social media. Till next week, it's been the Herle Burly.
Herle Burly.